Hi everyone and welcome to my channel. Today I have my first fall video for this year 2023 where I'll be sharing 20 of my favorite fall DIYs from last year. Keep in mind, since this is a mega video, they are labeled a little bit out of order. I really hope that you enjoyed today's video. Now let's get right into it. For the first DIY today, I'm going to be using 3 pieces of wood that are 19 inches by 2.5 inches. I usually buy all of my wood from either Lowe's or Home Depot. The first thing I'm doing is taking my folk art wood tint in the color walnut and I'm painting it on my pieces of wood in sections, and then once I have it all painted on, I use an old rag to wipe away the excess wood tint, and again I did that for all 3 pieces of wood. I'm also going to be using 2 smaller pieces of wood. These ones are 7.5 inches by 1.5 inches. And I'm doing the same thing, just using that wood tint in walnut. I'm painting it on and then wiping away the excess with an old rag. Next, I'm using hot glue on the sides of all 3 of my larger pieces of wood to hold them together. And then once I have them attached, I'm then going to be placing my 2 smaller pieces of wood on top. And then before I attach those down, I am going to be using this Welcome to Our Patch stencil. This is from Amazon and I will have it linked down in the description box. But I get the stencil centered where I want it to be, and then I start moving my smaller pieces of wood around, and I am using a measuring tape just to make sure that I have them spaced out exactly the same on both sides. And once I have them all spaced where I want them to be, I'm using hot glue on the bottom just to get them attached to the top pieces or the bottom pieces of wood. Then to keep my stencil from moving around, I'm using some painter's tape at the top and bottom just to keep it nice and straight. Then for my words, Welcome to Our Patch, I'm using my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster. And I was going to do the entire piece in white, but then I decided to do the pumpkin a different color. So I'm just going to be using some painter's tape over top of the pumpkin so that I don't get any of the white colored paint on the pumpkin. And once I have all of the words painted, I then peel the painter's tape off of the pumpkin and then just use that same tape over the words so that I don't get the pumpkin color on my words. Then for the pumpkin color, I'm using folk art matte acrylic paint in the color Pueblo. And then once the pumpkin paint was dry, I took some more painter's tape and placed it over top of the pumpkin because I'm doing the stem of the pumpkin in a different color. And the color I'm using for that is folk art chalk paint in the color Sage Shadow. Then after all of my paint was dry, I removed all of my painter's tape and my stencil. Since this is going to be a serving tray, I'm using these 2 handles. These ones are either from Home Depot or Lowe's, I can't remember. But I'm just using my measuring tape to make sure that I have them centered on my top pieces of wood. Once I have them all centered, I'm just moving them over a little bit and placing hot glue on the bottoms to attach them. And I did the exact same thing for the other side. And this is the tray all finished. This was such an easy project and it looks so high end and it was really inexpensive to create. I do recommend using a clear sealer over top just to make sure everything stays nice and protected. Moving right along into DIY number 2. For this one, I'm using this large paper mache pumpkin. This I did pick up from Hobby Lobby this year. And I'm first going to be taking some of these dot stickers. These are from Dollar Tree. And the only ones that I could find are these pink ones. But I do think they have like a pearl color that you can buy as well. So I do recommend getting the white color if you are going to be painting your pumpkin white. For this one, I'm just going to be taking the pink stickers and placing them in all of the grooves of the pumpkin. The little strips of the dots were not long enough to go all the way down, so I did have to do several strips. As you can see, I would just cut the little bead off until there was like a little strip showing, like you can see here, and then I would continue placing it next to the other dot, and it looked really seamless and you couldn't even tell that it was more than one strip. And I just continued to do that over and over in all of the grooves of the pumpkin until I had them all covered with the dots. After I had all of the dots on, then I'm going to be going in with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster, and I'm painting over the pink dots first because I'm going to have to do several coats of this paint over top just to get that pink color all covered up. I did do 4 coats on the dots, and then the rest of the pumpkin I only had to do 2 coats of this paint. Then once the paint was dry, I moved on to the stem, and for the stem of the pumpkin, I'm using the Folk Art Matte Acrylic Paint in the color Raw Sienna. I wanted to add a little bit more detail and dimension to my pumpkin, so I'm using my Folk Art chalk paint in the color Java, and I'm dry brushing this color over top of all of those dots that I added to all of the grooves of the pumpkin. This is just gonna really make those dots pop. So I did that, and it was kind of messy. I wanted this to look rustic and kind of old. So once I had the dots all covered up with this paint, I decided to use this same Java color and add a little bit of detail to the stem of the pumpkin to make it look a little bit more realistic. I then thought the pumpkin needed even more detail, so I took that same Java color and whatever was left over on my brush, and I just very lightly painted it on the rest of the pumpkin. And since this is a paper mache pumpkin, it did have a lot of little crevices and grooves, and once I put that Java color over top, it really made those pop, and it almost looked like the pumpkin was wood. Then I decided to add a second color. So for this one, I'm using that same Raw Sienna color that I used for the stem. I'm using a little bit less of this color than I did the Java color, and I'm just very lightly painting that again over all of the dots that I had added in the grooves, and then just a little bit on the other parts of the pumpkin. Next, I'm using some hot glue to attach Spanish moss all the way around my stem on the very top of my pumpkin. I'm also going to be using this Grateful faux leather tag from Hobby Lobby. I'm placing it around the stem of the pumpkin, and then to keep it in place, I'm using a little bit of hot glue underneath just to make sure that it doesn't move around. And then I'm also going to be using this leaf. This came from Dollar Tree from one of the fall stems. I used some hot glue to attach that right next to the Grateful tag, and then I added some of these mini pine cones that I believe are from Dollar Tree. They were in my craft stash, but I'm almost certain that Dollar Tree has the mini pine cones. And then I'm using some of these yellow florals, and I believe these ones are from Hobby Lobby. I just cut them down really short and then attached them behind my leaf, and then to hold it into place, I ended up adding a little bit more Spanish moss just so that it sits up a little bit. And then I use one of these little acorns right in the center in between 2 pine cones. And this is what the pumpkin looks like all finished. I love how this turned out. If it's perfect with my fall decor, you could do this pumpkin in so many different styles and different colors to make it fit with your own home decor. Now getting back in today's projects for DIY number 3. For this one, I'm using this bead wreath form from Hobby Lobby, and I'm also going to be using these fall eucalyptus stems from Hobby Lobby, and then these other fall stems from Hobby Lobby. This one usually has a white pumpkin attached to this piece, but I've already used the pumpkin on another project. The first thing I'm doing is starting with the eucalyptus stems. I'm using some pliers to cut 2 pieces off of the stems. I'm going to be using one on each side of the wreath. And then for the other fall stems, I'm just cutting off the raffia parts, and then I'm also going to be cutting off the little white berries that are on this piece as well. Then I'm taking the raffia and I'm using some hot glue to attach it to the bottom beads of the wreath form. And then I'm taking one of the eucalyptus stems and I'm going to be hot gluing that right over top of the raffia stem. But to hold it into place, I ended up taking a piece of jute and then just wrapping it around a couple times and tying it off so that those pieces would stay in place until the glue fully set. Then I did the exact same thing to the other side, just going in the opposite direction. I first hot glued the raffia stem down to the beads first, then the eucalyptus stem over top of the raffia, and then I took that piece of jute, wrapped it around the stems and the beads, and just tied that off to hold them into place until the glue fully set. Then I'm cutting off some of these white berries that were on the fall stems from Hobby Lobby. I'm cutting off 2 of them, 1 for each side of the bottom of my wreath. Then I'm also going to be using 1 of these pumpkins. These did come from the floral section at Hobby Lobby, but I ended up just using 1 of them for this project, and then I just cut the stem of it off. I'm also using this fall stem. This is also from Hobby Lobby. You can pick this one up in the fall picks at Hobby Lobby. I'm using 2 of them. I'm hot gluing this piece right over top of the raffia and the eucalyptus stem, just holding that into place until the glue sets. And of course, I did the exact same thing to the other side. Now I'm finally attaching those white berries that I cut off just a little while ago, and I'm hot gluing those right next to the fall stems that I just previously attached. Next, I'm attaching my pumpkin. I'm placing hot glue on the bottom of my pumpkin and then placing it in between all of the fall stems that I've attached to my wreath. Again, holding that into place until the glue is fully dry. I'm then adding some of these mini pine cones from Dollar Tree around my pumpkin. I'm now attaching some Spanish moss around both sides of my pumpkin. Once I have the moss all added, I did go back through and add a few more of the mini pine cones around the Spanish moss. And instead of having my wreath where all of the florals are on the bottom, I really like the look where all of the florals are going to be on the left side. So I just shaped my florals a little bit so that they would go around the side of the wreath. This is what it looks like all finished. I think it is absolutely beautiful. I love all of these colors together. And what's even better is this wreath only took me a few minutes to create. Next is a DIY number 4. For this one, I'm going to be using 2 scrap pieces of wood. These ones are 14 inches by 3.5 inches. And the first thing I'm doing to these ones is painting both of them with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster. I did 2 coats of paint on both pieces of wood. Then I'm going to be using 4 pieces of trim. This trim I did pick up from Lowe's and I've already cut it down. The longer pieces are 14 by 1/2 of an inch, and then the shorter pieces are 6 inches by 1/2 of an inch. I'm taking my Folk Art wood tint in the color Walnut and I'm painting this color on the trim in sections, and then once I would have the tint all painted on, I would use an old rag to wipe away the excess, and I did this on all 4 pieces of my trim. To hold the 2 pieces of wood together that I've painted in the plaster color, I am going to be using 4 popsicle sticks from Dollar Tree. I used hot glue on the popsicle sticks and then just attached those in between the 2 wood pieces. Again, I used 4 of them, and this is just making sure that my 2 plaster color pieces are going to stay together. Next, I'm using the trim pieces that I've stained, and I'm just going to be framing my wood pieces that I've painted in the plaster color. I'm placing the trim exactly where I want it to be so that it's all set before I start attaching it. To attach it, I am using hot glue. I just lifted up the pieces a little bit, placed the hot glue on the back side, and then just pressed the trim back down into place. And I did that for all 4 of my trim pieces. For this project, I'm going to be using these unfinished wood letters. These ones are from Hobby Lobby, and I'm spelling out the word hello. For the paint color that I'm using, it's in the color Pueblo, again from Folk Art, and it is the matte acrylic paint. I did all of the letters this color, and then I'm also going to be using this pumpkin wood word cutout. This one is from Michaels. It comes in a pack that says hello pumpkin, but I am only going to be using the pumpkin lettering from the pack because I really didn't care for the hello word. So once I have them all painted and the paint is dry, I am just going to be spacing them out the way I want all of my letters and my words to be, and then I'm going to be using hot glue on the back side to attach them. You will notice here in just a second, I didn't have my pumpkin word placed exactly where I wanted it to be, and the glue set too quickly, and I ended up breaking my middle P. But I just painted over it a little bit, hoping that you won't be able to notice it too much, but it ended up looking okay. But just be careful. not to break your letters like I did. Once I had the pumpkin word all on, I did go back through and use hot glue on the back side of all of my wood letters to spell out the word hello. Then for the last step, I am going to be using this orange and cream color checked ribbon from Hobby Lobby with 2 pieces of jute. I cut them down to the size that I'm going to want my hanger to be for my sign, and then I just used a staple gun to attach the jute and the ribbon to the back side of my sign. And this is what the Hello Pumpkin sign looks like all finished. This one to me looks like you could go and purchase this in a retail store, minus the broken P. But I really love how this one turned out, and it only took me a little bit to create it, and it was really inexpensive. Now moving into DIY number 5. This is the last DIY in today's video, and I'm starting with this sunflower paper. This is from Hobby Lobby, and I'm also using this house cutout. This one is from Dollar Tree, and I'm taking my paper and placing it over the front of my house, and I just started to sketch out where I'm going to need to cut my paper out. But once I started sketching it out, I realized I could just press down a little bit on the paper and it would make a little crease, and then I would be able to just use that as a guide when I'm cutting the paper. So here I'm just cutting the house shape on my paper, and then once I have that all cut out, I'm using some Mod Podge, and I'm just using a paintbrush to paint that Mod Podge on the back side of the paper, and then I'm placing it on the inside of my house dry erase board, and then just pressing that paper down and getting out any little creases and bubbles that are underneath. Next, I'm painting the frame of my house with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster. I probably should have done this part before I added the paper on the inside of the dry erase, but I didn't, so I just had to be very careful when painting around the inside of the frame. And then I'm taking this little square wood cutout. This one was a wood plank from Dollar Tree, and I ended up just cutting it to the size that is 3 inches by 3 inches. And then I painted it with the Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster. I'm also using this Fall Sweet Fall mini stencil from Amazon, and I will have the link to it down in the description box. I got the stencil all centered on my little piece of wood, and then I used painter's tape around the edges to hold the stencil into place so that it wouldn't move around once I start painting. For the paint color, I'm using my Folk Art chalk paint in the color Java, and I painted the entire words and leaves in this color. Then once the paint was all dry, I'm removing the painter's tape and the stencil from my wood piece. And this is what it looks like all painted. Now I'm moving on, and I'm using some of this wood bead trim. This I did pick up from Hobby Lobby, and I always like to get this when it's 50% off. What I'm doing now is just taking the wood beads, and I'm just stringing them along the very top roof of the house just to see how much I need before I cut the beads. And then I'm just going to be removing a few of them so I have a little bit of that string hanging out so I can tie a knot just to make sure that the beads stay all together. And then I'm using some of that wood tint in the color Walnut that I had left over on my rag from previous projects, and I'm just wiping that on the beads to give them a little bit more of a darker color. Then I'm going to be attaching the beads to the very top roof frame, and I'm using some hot glue to attach them, and I just made sure that they were really tight as I was hot gluing them down. And then I'm going to be having them go along the roof frame, and then where the frame of the house would meet the bottom of the house, I just had that strung across, and it, like I did with the rest, I just hot glued it to make sure that it stayed in place. Then I attached the 3x3 that I used my stencil on and just placed it at the bottom portion in the center of my house shape. And then to go around my 3x3 piece, I used some jute, and I just used some hot glue to attach the jute around all 4 sides. Another piece I'm going to be using for this project is this mini raffia bow. This did come in a pack in the fall section at Hobby Lobby this year. And then I'm using some of these little sunflowers. These ones I believe are from Dollar Tree last year. And I'm taking one of the sunflowers, I cut the stem off, and then I'm just hot gluing that right over the bead that was on the raffia bow. And then I'm hot gluing that right in the center of the beads at the top of my house. And then I added 2 more of those sunflowers on each side of my house. And this is what my piece looks like all finished. Another really easy project, and I just love this yellow color for fall. For the first project today, I'm going to be creating a pumpkin Tic Tac Toe. And I'm first starting with these 4 wooden beads, and they are flat at the top and bottom. These are going to be the feet for my Tic Tac Toe board. And the first thing I'm doing is just painting on my folk art wood tint in the color Walnut. Once I had the wood tint all painted on, then I just wiped away the excess with a rag. Next, I'm going to be using that same wood tint on this wood piece. This came with a bunch of different little wooden icons in it, and I always save these because I end up using them for projects later on. I did the same thing. I just painted the wood tint on, and then any excess I would just wipe away with a rag, and I did work in small sections when doing this. I'm also going to be using 9 of these unfinished wooden pumpkins from Hobby Lobby. 5 of them I'm going to be painting with my folk art acrylic matte paint in the color Pueblo, and then I'm going to be painting the remaining 4 of the pumpkins with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster. Then for the stems on all 9 of my pumpkins, I'm using the color Raw Sienna, and it is from Folk Art, and it is a matte acrylic paint. Next, I'm getting my wood beads placed exactly where I want them to be before I start attaching them, and then to attach them, I'm using hot glue. You could leave it just like this once the feet are attached and just have your Tic Tac board as is, but I wanted to dress up the pumpkins a little bit, so I took some jewelry wire and I just wrapped it around the stem of one of the pumpkins, and then I removed it and used a really small paintbrush handle, and I just wrapped that wire around the handle just to make a little like curly cues with the wire, and I did that on each side of the wire. And this is going to be like the little tendrils of the pumpkin. So once I have those all done up, I just placed it back onto the pumpkin stem, and then I did want to add a little bit more detail, so I took some leftover fall stems that I had from Hobby Lobby. I cut them down very small, and then I just hot glued a small piece of that right on the top of my pumpkin. And I added that same detail for the remaining 8 pumpkins. And this is what my Tic Tac Toe board looks like all finished. It is mini, so it's perfect for a small tabletop decor piece for this fall. It was super easy to do, and I love the way that it turned out. Now moving into DIY number 2. For this one, I'm using this wooden block. This is from Hobby Lobby, and it's about 4 inches by 2.5 inches. I'm also using a couple of these wood strips, also from Hobby Lobby, and I've already cut them down so that they will be framed around my wood block. Then for the strips, I'm using my folk art wood tint in the color Walnut. I'm painting the wood tint on and then just wiping away the excess with a rag like I always do, and I did this for all 4 of the strips. Then I painted my wood block with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster, and I only had to do 1 coat of this paint. Once the paint was dry, I then started attaching all of the wood strips around the edges of my blocks to form what will look like a frame. Now that I have my frame attached, I am going to be using this Thankful pumpkin stencil. This is from Amazon, and I will have it linked down in my description box. It is a little bit too large for me to place inside of the frame, so I just cut the stencil down a little bit. I got it centered where I want it to be, and then so that it doesn't move around, I'm just using some painter's tape around all of the edges to hold it into place for when I'm painting. Then for the word Thankful, I'm using the Folk Art chalk paint in the color Rich Black. Then for the pumpkin color that I'm using on my stencil, it's from Folk Art. It is a matte acrylic paint in the color Pueblo. Then for the greenery, I'm using Sage Shadow from Folk Art, and then the stem of my pumpkin is in Raw Sienna, also from Folk Art. I let the paint completely dry before removing the painter's tape and my stencil, and then I did want to add just one more little detail. So I took a piece of raffia along with a piece of jute and I just tied them together in a bow, cut down the bow a little bit, and then I hot glued that on the right hand side of my frame. And this is what the piece looks like all finished. Another really easy, affordable piece, and it is the perfect size for a tiered tray. Now moving right along into DIY number 3. For this one, I'm going to be making over one of these. Well, I did 2 of them, but I'm just going to be showing you one. It's a Dollar Tree pumpkin that I just recently picked up, and it has these cute little thankful tags on them. And the pumpkins are nice the way they are, but I wanted to jazz them up a little bit. So I first started by just removing the stems of the pumpkin, and then I took off the little thankful tag because I am going to be using that, but I will not be reusing the plastic stems. Next, I'm taking 2 strands of jute and I'm tying them together with a knot just so that they will stay together when I'm working with them. And then I'm taking some hot glue and placing it at the very top and the inside of my pumpkin, placing the jute over the glue to attach it, and then pulling those jute pieces around the pumpkin and up through the other seam of the pumpkin on the other side, hot gluing that at the very top, and then just cutting off the jute that was left over. I'm then doing that same step, tying 2 more pieces of jute together and just hot gluing them at the very top of the pumpkin, wrapping those around the seams of the pumpkin like you can see me doing here. And then when I pull them up on the other side, I'm just securing it with more hot glue and cutting off the jute. I then just continued that on all of the seams that were on this pumpkin. And then for the stem of my pumpkin, I'm going to be using this small piece of a branch that's already been cut down. I'm then placing hot glue on the inside of the pumpkin, and then the stem goes inside of the pumpkin right over top of that glue to hold it into place. And then I wanted to add a little bit of detail to this piece. So I'm taking some of these fall stems from Hobby Lobby, and these ones have already been cut down, and this is just like extra that I had in my stash. I'm cutting them down pretty small, and then once I have my pieces all separated, I'm going to be hot gluing them around the stem on top of my pumpkin. Next, I'm taking the little thankful tag that was originally on the pumpkin and I'm wrapping it around the stem, and then just to make sure that it stays into place, I am going to be securing it with some hot glue. And then I did end up adding even more of those little fall stems from Hobby Lobby around the tag. And this is what the made over Dollar Tree pumpkin looks like. It was cute when I first got it, but by adding just a few little changes, it fits so much better with my decor, and I think it looks a lot more high-end this way as well. Next up is DIY number 4. For this project, I'm using one of these glass jars from Hobby Lobby, and the first thing I'm doing is just removing the lid on the jar. I am not going to be using this for this project, so I'm just going to be setting that aside for another project. And then I'm using some of my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster, and I painted this color on my jar, and I did do 2 coats of this paint. Then I wanted to add some distressing to my jar, so I'm using my Folk Art chalk paint in the color Castle, and I'm dry brushing this color horizontally on my entire jar. Then I'm going to be taking this wheat bundle from Hobby Lobby, and I did have to bend up the stems a little bit so that they would fit inside of my jar. And then once they're placed in my jar, I ended up using some of these corn stalks. These are also from Hobby Lobby, and I'm just breaking them down a little bit so that they are in thinner strips. I'm then placing those corn stalk strips around all of the wheat. I'm adding some of these yellow florals as well. I believe these ones are a wheat as well. These were just in my craft stash that I've had for a while, and I'm placing them around the other wheat that I got from Hobby Lobby. And then I did want to add a little bit more color to my jar, so I ended up taking my Java color from Folk Art and I dry brushed that right over top of the Castle color on my jar just to give it a little bit more dimension. I'm then adding this faux leather thankful leaf. This did come from Dollar Tree. I'm wrapping it around the top of my jar, and then I just tied it in a knot and secured it with some hot glue. And this is the piece all finished, a really easy project that's perfect for tabletop or shelf decor this fall. Next up is DIY number 5. For this one, I'm going to be making a pillow. And for this, I'm using 2 of these placemats from Dollar General. Don't mind my puppy, she wanted to help out. And I'm also using this Fall is in the Air stencil from Amazon, and I will have it linked down below. I placed my stencil in the middle of one of my placemats, and then I just used painter's tapes to secure it down. Then for the paint color, I'm using my Folk Art chalk paint in the color Rich Black. And anytime that I'm stenciling on any kind of fabric, I always make sure that I use very small amounts of paint. I always just build the paint color up, and that prevents any bleeding underneath. I'm letting the paint completely dry before removing the tape and the stencil. I'm then taking the first placemat and I'm putting that down with the back of the placemat facing up, and then I'm placing the one that I just stenciled on down on top of that. I'm making sure that all of the lines on the placemats are even and exactly in the same spot, and then I'm taking some hot glue and I'm starting to just glue those 2 placemats together. You could use a fabric glue if you wanted to. I'm just using hot glue today. Or you could also sew these together if you are good at sewing. I personally am not, so I'm just using some hot glue today. So I did 3 sides glued together, and then one of the ends I left open, and that is where I'm going to be filling with polyfill. You can get polyfill at any craft store, or you can even buy it from places like Walmart as well, or Amazon. So I'm just stuffing my pillow to my desired stuffiness, which I do like a pretty full pillow, so I'm using a pretty good amount of polyfill. And then once I get to where I'm going to be gluing the end of this pillow up, I just place a little bit of polyfill right at the end, and then I glue it together, and then I just keep doing that. I add a little bit more polyfill so that that very end where I'm gluing right now is going to have a pretty good amount of stuffing. So again, just fill a little bit, glue a little bit, fill a little bit, glue a little bit until that entire end is all glued up. This is what my pillow looks like all finished. I think it turned out super cute, and you could do this with so many different colors and kinds of placemats and make your own custom pillows for so much less than what you would pay in store. Now moving right along into the 6th and final DIY for today, I'm using this sign from Dollar Tree where I've already peeled off one of the pieces to it, but I am going to be popping off this little heart shape as well because I'm not going to be using it for this project. Then I'm going to be using some of my matte acrylic paint from Folk Art in the color Pueblo, and I only did 1 coat of this paint. I'm then taking this scrap piece of burlap and I'm just pushing it down inside of this piece, and then I'm using a pen to kind of mark around where I need to cut my burlap to fit inside of this piece. Now that I have my burlap all marked, I'm just using some scissors to cut out the burlap, and then I'm using hot glue on the inside to secure my burlap. Then I wanted to add some detail on the inside, so I'm hot gluing cotton cord that I picked up from Hobby Lobby around the entire inside edge, and to secure it, again, like I said, I'm using some hot glue. Once I get around all 4 of the sides, I just cut the cotton cord and then hot glue the end piece down. I did want to add a little bit of distressing, so I used my Waverly paint and plaster and just really messily painted this around all of the edges of the frame of this piece. And then I'm going to be attaching this Welcome to Our Patch little piece that I picked up from the Target Dollar Spot this year. I'm using some hot glue on the back side of it and then just making sure I have it centered when I press it into the inside of the piece from Dollar Tree. I am going to add one of these little raffia bows with a button from Hobby Lobby at the top left-hand corner of my frame. And this is the tabletop sign all finished. I think it is so cute and rustic. Again, a really easy project. For the first DIY today, I'm going to be creating fabric pumpkins. This is the fabric I'm going to be using. It's this really pretty plaid fabric from Hobby Lobby. I'm loving the burnt orange color for fall this year. And I'm also going to be using this wood pumpkin just to use as a guide to trace around on my fabric. If you don't have a pumpkin shape like this that you can use to trace, you can always just print one from the internet and use that. So I'm just getting it all set up on my fabric, and then I'm using a marker to trace around the pumpkin. I did fold my fabric in half so that when I cut it out, it will be 2 different sheets of fabric. So then once I'm done tracing it, I'm just going in with my scissors and cutting it out. And like I said, I did fold the fabric over so that when I cut it out, I have 2 pumpkin shapes. Then I'm hot gluing the 2 fabric pumpkin sheets together. I placed the hot glue around the very outer edge of the pumpkin and then just press the 2 pieces of fabric together. If you don't want to use hot glue, you can always use fabric glue, fabric tape, or you can sew them if you're good at sewing. I, on the other hand, am not, so hot glue is my best friend today. I did leave an opening at the very top to fill my pumpkin, and I am filling it with polyfill. You can get polyfill at pretty much any craft store, and places like Walmart sell it as well. I filled my pumpkin to the stuffiness that I wanted it to be, which I do like a pretty full pumpkin. And then once I got to the very top, I glued a little bit more together, but I did leave still a very small opening, and that is where I'm going to be placing my stem. To create my stem, I am using 3 of these branches. These came from Hobby Lobby, and I'm using hot glue to attach 2 of the branches side by side, and then the 3rd branch I'm going to be hot gluing right in between the other 2 branches over top. I'm then placing the branches in that top hole of my pumpkin, and once I get it all placed where I want it to be, I'm then hot gluing the fabric around the branches. To add some detail to my pumpkin, I'm using 2 pieces of this rope trim. This is from Hobby Lobby, and I'm hot gluing the ends of that at the very top of my pumpkin and next to the branches, and then I'm having that go down and around the pumpkin where it curves up on the very bottom of the pumpkin, and then when it comes back around on the other side, I'm just cutting the rope off, and again, just hot gluing that at the very top. And I did the exact same thing with 2 more pieces of rope trim on the other side of the pumpkin. Then I'm adding some floral. This is a wheat floral that I've had in my stash for a while, and I thought it would be really cute to add this yellow color to the top of the pumpkin. So I just cut the wheat down a little bit, and then I added small pieces of it around the top stem of the pumpkin. I then added some more florals. I'm not even sure really what these are. These are off of a fall stem from Hobby Lobby, but I just really like the color and I like the texture of these, so I added that to the top of the pumpkin around where I just added the yellow wheat. For the last little detail to this pumpkin, I created a raffia bow, and then I just glued that at the top stem of the pumpkin. What I didn't get filmed is I did end up adding another raffia bow that's already pre-made with a little button on it from Hobby Lobby right over top of the raffia bow that I just created. This is what the pumpkin looks like all finished. I did end up making a larger one as well. These were so easy to create, and what's great about these is they are perfect for using scrap fabric that you already have at home. Now moving on to DIY number 2. For this project, I'm going to be using this cute little wagon from the Target dollar spot. It was $5, and I just think it is the cutest thing, and I wanted to add a few little extra details to this piece. I'm also going to be using this little bit larger of a dowel rod. I did cut it down into 2 different pieces. The longer piece is 4.5 inches, and then the smaller piece is 1/2 of an inch. I'm also using a tumbling tower block from Dollar Tree, and as you can see here, I've already taken my drill and drilled a little divot in the end of it so that my dowel rod will fit inside of that little hole. Then I'm taking my folk art chalk paint in the color Rich Black, and I'm painting my little Jenga or tumbling tower block from Dollar Tree, and then also the 2 pieces of dowel rod. I'm then attaching my block using some hot glue to the bottom of my wagon, but I'm leaving where I've drilled the little divot sticking out from the front of the wagon. Once I have that glued, I'm then going to be attaching my dowel in that little divot hole that I've already drilled. I place the hot glue in the hole and then I press down my dowel inside of the hole to attach it. Then for the very last little piece of dowel, I'm just attaching that at the top of the larger one, and I used hot glue to attach it, and I just placed it at the top, and this is going to be the little handle to my wagon. Then it was time to create a sign to go on the side of my wagon. I am using this small little scrap piece of wood. This did come from Dollar Tree in an assortment wood pack that I got a while ago, and I'm just painting it with that rich black chalk paint. I let the paint dry, and I did create a little sign on my Cricut to go on this piece of wood. It just says Farm Fresh Pumpkins. If you don't have a Cricut to create this, you can always use stickers or just hand write this on your piece of wood with a marker. I then hot glued my little sign on the center post of my wagon. Then I'm going to be adding some of this hay from Dollar Tree. This is one of the little mini hay bales that you can get there. I did take my pliers and cut off the little wire that was around it because I did want to have the hay just like spread on the inside of my wagon. And this stuff is super messy, but I think it was worth it because this turned out really cute. So once I have all of my little hay inside of the wagon, I just place some mini pumpkins inside of the hay or over top of the hay. And I did end up adding a few little pine cones as well. And this is what my wagon looks like all finished. I only did a few little changes, but the ones that I did make, I think made a huge difference. I just love how this turned out. And as you can tell, I did switch out the pumpkins for ones that were a little bit more colorful. Moving back into today's projects for DIY number 3. For this one, I'm going to be using this wood block. This one did come from Michael's. It is from the Art Minds brand. And then I'm just painting it with my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster. I'm also going to be using this larger piece of wood. This did come from Hobby Lobby, and I've already cut mine down to 12.5 inches. I'm also painting this piece with that same plaster color chalk paint. I'm also using these 3 arrows. These did come off of a sign from the Target dollar spot, and I've just had them sitting in my craft stash for a while, so I figured I would use them for today's project. The first one I'm going to be painting with the Folk Art acrylic matte paint in the color Pueblo, and then for the second one I'm going to be painting it in the color Vintage Mustard from Folk Art, and then the third arrow I'm painting with the color True Burgundy, also from Folk Art. I am using another scrap piece of wood. This one is 7 inches long. I forgot to mention that the arrows were 8.5 inches long. For this piece, I am painting it with that same plaster colored chalk paint, and then I let all the paint dry. And for this project, I did use my Cricut, and I created this first one that says Harvest Farms, just really simple, and I transferred that onto my block that I just painted. If you don't have a Cricut, you can always use stickers or just hand write these words on with a marker. For the orange color arrow, I did the words that say pumpkin patch. For the vintage mustard, I did hay rides. And then for the burgundy colored arrow, I did the words apple picking. I then took the arrows and placed them onto the larger block that I had already painted and just kind of spaced them out where I wanted them to be, with the Harvest Farms at the very top. And then I just used hot glue to attach each arrow and then the sign at the very top. Then it was time to start adding some detail, so I took 2 strands of jute and wrapped them around the very top of my sign above the word harvest, and then the ends of the jute I just stapled to the very back of the sign. And then I did the same thing again with 2 strands of jute, only this time under the word farms, and just wrap that around and use my staple gun to secure the jute in place. I then created a really simple bow with this mustard colored raffia that I recently picked up from Hobby Lobby. And once I had my bow made, I cut the tail ends of the raffia to my desired liking, and then I hot glued that bow in the top left hand corner of the top of the sign. I then added a little button to the very center of my bow. Next, it was time to get my pole assembled, so I placed hot glue in the very bottom of my block, like stand piece, I guess you could call it, and then just placed the pole on top of that. I am going to be using these 3 little mini wood pumpkins. These are from Hobby Lobby, and I'm painting all 3 of the pumpkins with the Folk Art matte acrylic paint in the color Pueblo, and I just did 1 coat of paint. And then for the stems of the pumpkins, I did them in the Folk Art paint in the color Raw Sienna. I was finally able to find these little mini hay bales from Dollar Tree, and I thought this project would be perfect to finally use them. So I just have them placed at the very bottom of my sign, and I'm hot gluing each one of them down into place. And then over top of the hay bales, I'm hot gluing all 3 of my pumpkins. And I did add a little pine cone just for some extra detail. And this is what the piece looks like all finished. This one was so easy to do, and it definitely is a statement piece. I am going to be using this for years to come. Moving right along into DIY number 4. For this one, I'm going to be using this unfinished wood palette pumpkin from Dollar Tree. I've already removed the hanger that was on the top of the sign, and now I'm just painting on my Folk Art wood tint in the color Walnut. I paint on a good amount, and I am working in sections, and then I'm just wiping away the excess wood tint with an old rag. I'm also using this mini wooden crate from Dollar Tree, and I'm doing the same thing as I did with the pumpkin. I'm using my Folk Art wood tint in the color Walnut, just painting it on and then wiping away the excess tint with a rag, and I did this to the entire crate. I placed the pumpkin onto the crate and got it spaced exactly right on the back to where they line up, and then I just used some hot glue to attach them together. Then I'm using some Spanish moss also from Dollar Tree. I'm just placing it inside of my crate. And then I'm going to be using some of these really pretty dark and light yellow flowers. These ones I believe are from Hobby Lobby, but they might be from Michael's. So I just took some of them off of their stems so that it was easier for when I'm going to put them in my crate. And then I'm also using some of these mini little sunflowers. These ones are from Hobby Lobby. And I did use my pliers to cut them down again so that they're easier to place inside of my crate. I then just started placing them in the Spanish moss, and I ended up adding some cornstalk pieces around the flowers, and then I also added a few little pine cones as well. Next, I'm taking a piece of fabric. This fabric is from Hobby Lobby, and I just cut a long strip of it, and then I'm wrapping it around the stem on top of my pumpkin and then just tying it in a knot. I'm also going to be using some raffia. I took a few different strands, wrapped it around the stem of the top of the pumpkin, and then just tied that into a double knot. Then to make sure that my fabric stays in place and to cover up the holes that were already in the top of the pumpkin, I just hot glued the fabric over top of those holes. And then for this project, I'm also going to be using this Grateful word cutout. This one did come from Hobby Lobby, and I painted it with my plaster color chalk paint. I did lose the clip where I was doing that, so I'm just letting you guys know where I got this word cutout and what I painted it with. So I'm just using some hot glue on the back side of the cutout, and then I'm placing it in the top left-hand side of my pumpkin. And I did end up adding a little raffia bow with a button that is also from Hobby Lobby. This is what it looks like all finished. I think this one is so rustic and cute, and it was really easy to do. Now for the 5th and final project. Today I'm going to be using this glass jar from Hobby Lobby. It was $3.99, but then I got it half off of that, and it did come with a cork in it, but I just removed that and I'll be saving it for later. I took a piece of jute and I tied it around the very bottom of my jar, and then I'm going to just start wrapping the jute around the jar over and over, making sure that I hold the jute really tight when doing this, and then just keeping the jute at the bottom half of the jar. Once I get it wrapped around a few times, I did take a little bit of hot glue and then just secure the jute into place. And then I would continue just going around and around and around again until I got to the very bottom. And then again, just used hot glue to secure that jute into place. I'm also using these wood letter beads to spell out the word fall. I'm taking each bead and stringing them onto a piece of raffia, and then once I have them all strung next to the last letter L, I am tying a double knot to make sure that the letters stay on the raffia and don't move around. I'm then setting that aside and then taking several more strands of raffia and tying them around the top of my jar, and I tied a double knot and then just cut off the excess ends that were super long. Next, I'm taking the wood beads and the extra little raffia piece next to the letter F. I strung it around the raffia that I just tied around my jar, and then now I'm taking that strand that was still attached, I hope this makes sense, and I'm putting it back through each one of the beads, and then just tying that off in a knot to hold all of the beads in place and to now have it attached to the raffia that's on the jar. And then for the last step, I ended up just adding some fall colored floral from Hobby Lobby. This is what the jar looks like all finished. I think it looks super high end, and it was really easy to do for only a few dollars. By far the easiest project in today's video. For the first DIY today, I'm going to be using one of these unfinished wood apples from Dollar Tree. It has a little like holder or box on the inside and then the two apple shapes on the outside. The first thing I'm going to be doing is painting both sides of the apple shape, and I just mixed two colors from Folk Art. They're the colors Imperial and Tuscan Red. Then for the leaf portion on this apple, I'm using the color Spanish Moss, also from Folk Art. And then for the stems of my apple, I'm using the color Raw Sienna, also from Folk Art. For this project, I'm also going to be using the wheels that came from this race car wood shop pack from Dollar Tree, and you can get this in the toy section. These are what the wooden wheels look like, and since they do have a little hole in the middle, I just placed them on a dowel, so it was a little bit easier for me to paint, and I painted all of them with a black chalk paint. Then for the center of my wheels, I'm going to be using 4 of these wood rounds. These did come from a Dollar Tree assorted wood pack that I got a few years ago, and I'm going to be painting all 4 of them with my plastered color chalk paint from Waverly. For this project, I'm also going to be needing to make a handle. So for this, I just used a wooden dowel from Dollar Tree, and I've cut it down. The longer piece is 3 inches, and then the shorter piece here is 1 inch. And I painted both of these pieces with that same plaster colored paint. To go on the very front of my apple, I did already create this little decal on my Cricut, and I will have it linked down in my description box if you guys are wanting to use it as well. I just got it all centered in the middle of my apple and got it transferred, and then it was time to start attaching my wheels. I used hot glue to do this, and I just placed the wheels at the very bottom of the apple where it goes out a little bit, and then right in the center of the black wheels, I added those little wood rounds that I painted with the plaster color. Then I'm taking one of these tumbling tower blocks from Dollar Tree, and I'm painting it with the plaster colored paint. Then once the paint has completely dried, I'm then going to be using hot glue to attach it to the very bottom of my apple, but I am going to be leaving about 1/4 of an inch of the block sticking out, and this is where I'm going to be attaching the handle to the wagon that I have now created. Now I did want the handle to my wagon to stick out kind of on a diagonal, so I just held it out and then just placed a bunch of hot glue at the very bottom and then just held it into place until the glue completely set. I did end up going back through and adding some of that plaster colored paint over the glue just to cover it up, and then I am going to be attaching with the hot glue once again the little 1 inch dowel handle part. Next, I'm going to be using 5 of these unfinished wooden apples or pumpkins. You can use them for either one, and they are from Dollar Tree. I'm going to be painting all 5 of them with that same paint that I created earlier, the Imperial and the Tuscan red color mixed together just to make this deeper colored red. And then for the stems of all of the apples, I'm using the color Raw Sienna. Now it was time to start filling the inside of my apple wagon. I first took a piece of floral foam and just set that in the inside, and then I took some of what looks like faux straw. You can also get this at Dollar Tree. I just cut it up a little bit and then placed it right over top of the floral foam. And then over top of the straw, I'm just placing all of my little apples on the inside. Now, once I had them all placed in, I didn't really think that they popped being all of the red color, so I did end up going back through and repainting 2 of the apples, the Spanish moss color from Folk Art, and then I ended up liking the way that that looked a lot better. And here is my apple wagon all finished. This was such a fun and easy project, and I love how it turned out. I'm really enjoying having some of the apple decor in my home this fall. It's just a little bit different than all of the pumpkins that you see everywhere. Moving right along into DIY number 2. For this one, I'm using one of these arrow signs that you can get from Dollar Tree. This one does say ceremony on it, and obviously I wanted to switch it up a little bit. So I'm just painting over the entire arrow with my plaster colored chalk paint, and I did do 2 coats just to get that ceremony word all covered up. I'm also going to be using 3 of these unfinished wooden apples from Dollar Tree, and I'm painting all of them with that same red color that I created in the last project. It was Tuscan red and Imperial mixed together to create this really deep red color. And then for the stems of all of the apples, I'm painting them with Raw Sienna, and then for the leaves, I'm using the color Spanish Moss. Another item I'm going to be using from Dollar Tree to create today's project are these unfinished wood letters, and I'm spelling out the word apples. For each letter, I'm going to be painting them with my rich black chalk paint from Folk Art. Then before I start adding anything, I decided to use some of that same black colored chalk paint to distress my arrow. I mainly used the color around the edges, but I did do a little bit of distressing on the mid section of the arrow as well. And then once I had that all finished, I started just placing my letters right in the center of where I'm gonna want to attach them. I always like to do this before I start just hot gluing them down because I want to make sure I have them in the correct spot before I actually glue them down. So as you can see here, I'm just using hot glue to attach each letter. Originally, I was just gonna leave the apples plain and add some Spanish moss over top, but then I changed my mind and ended up using this black and white checked ribbon from Dollar Tree. I just tied it around the stem and leaf of the apple and then just made a really simple bow and then cut off the ends of the bow to the length of my liking. And then I did this for all 3 of the apples. I also wanted to make the apples pop a little bit more, so I took some of my plaster colored paint and I dry brushed that around all of the edges of the apples, and then I used a little bit on the fronts of the apples as well. Now that I have all of my apples ready, I can start gluing them to the very back of my arrow. I started with the center apple first, and then I hot glued the other 2 apples on each side of the one in the middle. And this is what my apple sign looks like all finished. Again, another really easy and inexpensive project for this fall, and I'm really loving the apples this year. Now getting right back into the DIYs. For DIY 3, I'm going to be using 2 of these wooden crates from Dollar Tree, and I'm going to be using my Folk Art wood tint in the color Walnut. I'm just painting it on with a small brush so that I can make sure that I get in all of the little grooves on the crate, and then once I have a good section painted, I just wipe the excess off, and I continued to do that until I had both crates all stained. I'm also going to be using this paint stick that I've already cut down to 5 1/4 by 1 inch. Now this I did not get at Dollar Tree, it was just in my craft stash, but you could always use one of the wood planks from Dollar Tree like this one here and then just cut it down to the size that I'm using. For my paint stick, I am going to be painting it with this plaster colored chalk paint from Waverly. And then I'm using 5 of these wooden apples. These I got off of Amazon and they are such great quality. If you want to check them out, I will have a link down in my description box. And I'm painting them with that same color I created, the Tuscan Red and Imperial mixed together. I'm just painting the front of all of the apples this color, and then for the stems I'm using raw sienna once again, and then the leaf on the apples I'm using the color Spanish Moss. Now this project that I'm doing is mostly Dollar Tree. You will see a few items that are from a few different places, but mainly it will be from Dollar Tree. To go in the center of each one of the apples that I just painted, I wanted to have mini letters to spell out the word apples. So I cut them out on my Cricut and then I'm just transferring them to the center of each one of my apples. If you don't have a Cricut to cut the letters out, you can use stickers from Dollar Tree, or you can even write them out with a white paint marker. Next up, I'm going to be using 4 of these wood dowels from Dollar Tree. They are 8 inches long, and I'm using my folk art wood tint in the color Walnut. I'm just painting the tint on and then using an old towel to wipe away the excess. And again, I did this for all 4 dowels. Then it was time to start assembling everything together. I hot glued both of the crates together, but for the top crate, I had it so that it was glued to the bottom crate with the bottom on top, if that makes sense. I'm then going to be hot gluing 2 of the dowels together, and then I'm taking those 2 dowels and hot gluing them on the left side of the top of my crate. I'm then doing the same thing for the leftover 2 dowels. I'm gluing those together and then hot gluing those 2 on the right side of the top of my crate. Now going back to the mini apples, I'm taking each one and placing it in the center of that paint stick that I had painted with the color plaster, making sure they're all centered, and then just hot gluing each one of them back down into place. I'm then using hot glue to attach the paint stick to the very top of my dowels, and I did leave about a ½ inch of the dowel sticking out at the top. Next, I'm going to start creating all of the little detail pieces I'm going to be adding. So first up, I just took some burlap ribbon from Dollar Tree and I'm cutting that to the length that goes between my 2 dowels. I'm going to be creating a mini banner. So once I have that piece cut, then I'm just cutting this piece of burlap ribbon in half to create a thinner piece. And then I'm going to be just cutting triangles going all the way up to the very edge of the ribbon. And I just continue to do that all the way down the ribbon so that it then looks like a banner. I then thought it would be really cute to add some of this red and white checked cardstock. This I believe is from Hobby Lobby. So I just cut a strip of it, and then from the strip I'm just going to be cutting tiny little triangles, because these little triangles are going to go right in the center of the burlap ribbon triangles that I just cut. To attach these little triangles, I'm just using a tiny bit of hot glue in the center of the burlap ribbon and then just pressing the cardstock over top of that to attach it. Now that I have my banner created, I'm using hot glue at the very top of the left-hand side of the banner and just gluing that under the A, and then I'm using some hot glue all the way on the right side of the banner and hot gluing that side underneath the letter S. I thought it would be really cute to add some mini apples to this piece. So to do that, I'm using some of these mini wooden beads from Dollar Tree, and I'm just placing them on this little piece of wood that I had. I thought it would be a lot easier to paint them this way. And the color that I'm using to paint my apples is Imperial from Folk Art. I did not mix this one. I used just the straight Imperial to paint all 4 of these beads. And then I wanted to add some green apples as well. So the color I'm using for these is the color Spanish Moss from Folk Art. Now that I have all of my apples painted, I then needed to create stems for them. To do that, I'm just using this piece of balsa wood that I had in my craft stash, and I'm painting it with the color Raw Sienna. Once that paint dried, I'm then using a utility knife to just cut some very small chunks of this off. If you're not familiar with balsa wood, it is a very soft wood that's super easy to cut and really easy to dent up as well. So after I had the chunks all cut off, I realized that they were just a little bit too thick. So then I just used my utility knife again to just cut that in half. And then I hot glued each one of those little pieces inside of my little bead to create my apple. I then continued to do that same thing for the rest of all of my beads to create all of my apples. Next, I'm using one of these glass bottles from Dollar Tree, and I thought it would be a really cute idea to make this my apple cider jug. So I'm taking the raw sienna color from Folk Art and I'm just squeezing it right inside of the bottle, and then I'm gonna put the cork back on the bottle and then just roll the bottle around so that the paint coats the entire inside of the bottle. I'm then using a smaller bottle also from Dollar Tree, and I'm doing the same thing with this one. I'm just putting a little bit of that raw sienna color inside of the bottle, only this time I didn't wait around for it to coat the inside. I just took a paintbrush and painted the inside of the bottle, and then once it was completely coated, I put the cork back on. Next, I'm going to be creating mini labels for my apple cider bottles. I'm using this red and white cardstock from Hobby Lobby, and I'm just cutting a piece of it out. As you can see here, I already have a piece of white cardstock that I cut out and then with a pen wrote the words apple cider on. I lost that clip, but it's really easy. You just cut out cardstock and write the words on it. And then, as you can see here, I'm just cutting that red and white checked cardstock down so that it goes right behind the white cardstock. I'm then taking the checked cardstock and hot gluing it to the front of my bottle. And then once that's attached, I'm using my glue stick from Dollar Tree to attach the apple cider cardstock over top of the checked cardstock. I then created a second one for my second bottle, only this time I did it a little bit easier. I just used my glue stick and attached the apple cider cardstock right over top of the checked cardstock before I attached it to my bottle. You would have thought I would have done this the first time, but I didn't. So it was a little easier this second time around. Next, I'm taking 2 popsicle sticks from Dollar Tree, and I'm gonna start by cutting off the round ends. And I just did that with my utility knife. I scored over it in the same spot several times and then just snapped it off. It was really easy to do this. Just be careful, you don't want to cut yourself. I then cut the other side of the popsicle stick to the length that I wanted it to be the same way. I just scored over it several times and then just snapped the stick in half like you can see me do here. And then I did another one the exact same length because I am going to be creating a small box. This little piece of wood that you saw there, it is going to be the bottom of my box. It did come from the assorted wood pack that I got from Dollar Tree, and it needed to be a little bit shorter because I needed it to be the same length of the popsicle stick that I just cut. So here I'm just cutting that down to size. And then I needed to do 2 smaller ones to go on each side of the little box that I'm making. So as you can see, I'm just making sure I have it marked to where I need to cut, and then doing the same thing with my utility knife that I did with the other pieces. Just scored over them and snapped them in half. And since I need 2 to go on each side, I cut out 2 of them. I'm then painting all of those pieces with my plastered colored chalk paint, and I did have a few leftover cut pieces that I'll be using for signs on my piece. Then I'm going to be assembling everything together. I used hot glue to assemble my little rectangle box, and as you can see here, I did the 2 longer side pieces first, and then I attached the 2 shorter pieces on each end. Once my box is all complete, I'm then going to be adding some straw from Dollar Tree to the inside, and I'm using hot glue first on the inside and then just pressing that straw over top to make sure that it's nice and secure. And then I'm going to be adding the mini apples that I made earlier on in the video. I'm using 2 red ones and 2 green ones, and I'm just hot gluing them right over top of the straw. Next, I'm going to be creating a sign to go on the front of my crate. I'm using one of these wood planks from Dollar Tree that I've already cut down, and I'm painting it with my plastered colored chalk paint. Once the paint has dried on this, I'm then going to be transferring on one of these decals that I created with my Cricut. It says pick your own with 3 apples underneath. If you guys are interested in using this cut file, I will have it linked down in my description box. After I have it all transferred on, you will see what I'm doing here. I ended up writing a bunch of stuff underneath the pick your own decal that I made, but I did not like it at all. So you can see this is what it looked like, and then I decided that I didn't like it. So I'm just using my utility knife to cut it off where I had wrote all of the words underneath. I don't like my handwriting and I think it looked really sloppy, so I just used my utility knife to cut that off like you can see me doing here. And I ended up just using the pick your own part, and the piece of wood ended up being 3 inches by 1 inch. Then I wanted to make another little sign, so with one of these scrap popsicle stick pieces that I had left over, I had painted that with a plaster color, and then with a pen I'm just writing apples 5 cents on it. And then I wanted to have it on a little stake, and I had one of these little wood pieces from the Dollar Tree assorted wood pack. I quickly painted this with the plaster color, and then I just hot glued the apple little sign to the wood stake. Next, I am just going to start assembling more things together. I am hot gluing my little apple box on the right hand side of my crate, and then I hot glued the apple 5 cent sign right over top of where I had placed the apples. I then hot glued each one of my apple cider bottles on the left side of my crate, and then I thought it would be really cute to add some faux donuts. So I'm using these mini wood beads from Dollar Tree, and I'm just going to be painting them. I'm using the River Walk color from Folk Art. Again, I'm using one of these little mini wood stakes, and it's perfect to add a bead on the end of it so you can paint it without getting your fingers all painted over. So once I have those all painted, I'm going to be creating another little mini sign with one of the popsicle sticks that I had left over, and I'm just writing donuts 10 cents on this one. And then I'm going to be hot gluing each one of my donuts right in front of my apple cider bottles. And I did 3. I did 2 donuts next to each other and then 1 on top. And then I added my little pick your own sign right in the center of my wood crates. And then after that, I added the donuts 10 cents on the left hand side of the crate right underneath the donuts. Next, I'm taking one of these birch wood pieces from Dollar Tree, and I'm hot gluing it to the left hand side of the front of my crate. And then I'm going to be using my 3 leftover mini apples that I have, and I'm hot gluing them on the very top of the birch wood piece. Then to add some detail to my pick your own sign, I'm using the red and white checked cardstock once again. I'm just measuring it to the length that it will fit on the top and bottom of my sign. And then I'm just painting on a little bit of Mod Podge on the top of the sign and then just gluing on the cardstock. And again, I did the same thing to the bottom. I just cut the cardstock down to size, used some Mod Podge, and then placed the cardstock over top to attach it. I thought it'd be really cute to add some corn stalks to this piece, so I'm using some raffia from Dollar Tree, and I'm just taking several pieces of it all together and then just cutting it down to the length that I want. I did try to use the pieces that were a little bit thicker, and then I took just another strand of raffia and I wrapped it around the center of all of the ones that I have bunched together, and then just tied it really tight to create my cord stalk. I then trimmed it up a little bit with my scissors and then hot glued this one on the right hand side of the front of my crates. After I had this cornstalk all created and on, I thought I needed to add a second one. So what I ended up doing was just creating another one, but the little birch wood piece that I have already attached, I peeled that off, put the cornstalk on, and then I re-glued my donut sign and then also my birch wood piece over top of the cornstalk. And this is what my mini apple stand looks like all finished. I love this one so much. This is by far my favorite project from today's video. I had so much fun creating it. It did take a little bit of extra time on this one, but I think it is so worth it, and I really hope that you enjoy this one as well. Now moving into DIY number 4. For this project today, I'm going to be using this apple picture frame from Dollar Tree, and I am first starting out by removing the center wood piece of the frame and then just removing it. And then I'm painting the outside portion of my apple with that color that I've been creating today with the Tuscan red and the Imperial colors from Folk Art. I just mixed them together to create this really deep red, and I only had to do 1 coat of paint. Then for the leaf of the apple, I'm doing this one in Spanish moss, and then the stem of the apple I'm doing in the color raw sienna. Then for the inside wood circle that I removed, I'm painting that with my plaster colored paint. For this project, I'm also going to be using one of these wood planks from Dollar Tree. I have cut this one down as well, and it is 4.5 by 3 inches, and I'm painting this with that plaster paint as well. Then once the paint was dry on my circle, I have created this apple cider served fresh daily sign on my Cricut. I will have it linked down in the description box if you're interested in the download. And then I'm just getting it transferred right in the center of my circle. And then it did have a little line, but it looked kind of wonky. So I ended up just removing it and then using a pen to create 2 lines. I'm just using this little wood plank piece that I had to make sure that I have a straight line, and like I said, I did 2 lines instead of 1, and I ended up really liking the look of it. Next, I'm placing hot glue around the back side of my circle and then just placing it right in the center of my apple to attach it. Then I wanted to have a little bit of distressing on the centerpiece, so I'm using some of my Java colored chalk paint, and I'm just dry brushing that all around the edges of the circle and then a little bit on the front of the circle as well around all of the vinyl. I'm taking some of this burlap ribbon and just cutting a strip of it out, and then I'm cutting that strip in half because I need to have a thinner piece of this burlap ribbon. I'm then taking it and wrapping it around the back side of the apple, and then the 2 front pieces I'm just crisscrossing around each other, and then I'm hot gluing those into place so that they don't move around. I'm also going to be using this green and cream color checked ribbon. This is from Hobby Lobby, but I know that Dollar Tree has similar ribbon. I'm just wrapping that around the burlap ribbon at the very top, and then I'm just making a really simple bow, cutting off the ends of both of my ribbons, and then I'm just making sure to hot glue my green ribbon into place. Then I'm taking another strip of this burlap ribbon from Dollar Tree. I'm cutting it pretty thin. I would say it's about 1 inch in thickness, and then I'm just going to be measuring that out to the same length that my wood plank piece is, and then I'm taking that piece of ribbon and just hot gluing it in the center of my wood plank. Now, I only had 1 piece on, and then I thought it needed to be a little bit thicker. I cut it too thin, so I ended up just adding another piece like you can see me doing here, and then I'm hot gluing my apple right in the center of my wood plank, right over top of that burlap ribbon. But then my apple didn't want to stay up, so I'm using 3 of these tumbling tower blocks from Dollar Tree. I'm hot gluing all of them together, and then I'm hot gluing those right behind my apple, and that is just gonna make my apple stay up without falling over. And this is what my apple cider sign looks like all finished. It was another really easy project that turned out super cute. And that wraps it up for today's fall mega video. I really hope that you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you're not subscribed, I hope that you will consider subscribing. And please be sure to hit the notification bell so that you don't miss out on any of my future videos. And I want to thank you guys so much for watching.